So here, the conversation goes to pick apart thing concepts like using evolution to define life. All right. I mean, the universe is a big place. It's a big expanse. So the conditions can be really different in different places. A basic problem with using evolution to define life is that if you find life, you're going to find an individual, or a population of individuals. I mean, I think that should be fairly straightforward concept. If you're traveling through space, you send some probe to Mars or to another solar system, and they find life. They're going to find either one single individual or a bunch of different individuals living in a group. You will not see evolution. There's no way to see evolution because evolution is the change in the population over time. That's the theory of evolution. That's the use of that theory of evolution, the explanation of what we see here on Earth is that there's a change in the population over time. So you will not see evolution in individuals or a population. So that doesn't really help NASA try to identify life on other planets. The other thing is that it's the idea of their definitions being very scriptive, right? Meaning a script, right? Or stipulative, right? In other words, they're defining life in a certain way. And anything that doesn't fall in that circle is not alive. Only things in that circle are alive. Everything else is not life, right? And that's a problem because you're talking about going to places that we don't know anything about. And then there's a book written by Feinberg and Shapiro a long time ago. And Feinberg was a famous physicist, and Shapiro was a famous biochemist. So together they worked for 3 years writing this book called Life Beyond Earth. And the crux of the book was to look at what does it really take to have life. Now you have to imagine this is like in the 40s and 50s, 60s, that they thought about these concepts and did their studies. And then in 1980, they published this book that started thinking about life off planet Earth that didn't even have anything to do with carbon, which is how we find life on this planet. All life on this planet is based on the element carbon. They suggested that you could have life on Earth in space that could depend on gases, that interstellar gases, or life that's energy based, and just electromagnetic field variations that could have information, all kinds of crazy, bizarre systems of life that have nothing to do with chemicals or chemistry, that may not even have anything to do with evolution. Like, no one's discussed this because it seems to be, what if life evolved in a place where it didn't change much, that was pretty consistent, then evolution would be inconsequential. I think the big point here is that there are issues with any real stipulative. If it doesn't have this, it's not life. If it has this, it's life. Because of all these other options that could exist outside of what we have come to understand, that life is on planet Earth. and we tend to think of life as being complicated. You know, one of the simpler forms of life, quote unquote simpler, would be a virus. And, you know, one of the problems with a virus is it's not a full cell. It doesn't have all the components that a cell would have. It doesn't really process energy. It's pretty simple, which allows us even to use it as a tool in medicine. We can even use viruses as tools to deliver DNA or to deliver RNA. So it's interesting that this idea of life is being complicated, because we think of human life or dog life or whale life, birds, as being these complicated multicellular organisms. But some of the simplest forms of life, a simple bacteria, is still alive. And who knows, maybe there's something even or as a simple virus. Or who knows, maybe there is something even simpler than that out there, you know? Evolution does seem to have favored more complicated, or life on Earth has definitely seemed to move towards being more complicated, more specialized groups of organisms like humans and like whales and like jellyfish, etc. But that's here on Earth. It could easily have gone the other way. And there are bacteria that have been around for a very long time and will continue to be around. So when we look at life and we start thinking about things that and we think about life being complicated, about life becoming more complicated over time, it may have easily gone in the opposite direction on some other planet, in some other place, or even here on Earth somewhere. As an example of complexity and just comparing complexity, they look at an amoeba. It's a single-celled organism. Looks something like so. It changes its form as it moves along. It has a nucleus, and various organelles, streams. It moves around, sort of like your white blood cells. That amoeba has 670 billion base pairs. You don't know what those are yet, or at least some of you don't. That's your DNA is paired. Your DNA strands are paired, so that you have A pairs with T and G with C. There's 670 billion of those pairs in an amoeba. In a human only has 3.2 billion base pairs. So what they're asking here is then this single-celled amoeba more complicated than the human? Interesting question. So again, here's this idea of a working definition, right? A working definition allows us to say, okay, let's define something this way for now. Let's agree that until we gather enough information, and maybe we have to change it. We're going to have to keep changing it. We have to keep coming back and reflecting. And then revising this definition, right? It's a definition we all kind of come to terms. We all agree that this is the definition of the word that we're using. And life is one of those working definitions. We're going to define it this way until we might have to change it. We have to acknowledge that we might have to change it. But for now, this is what we're going to use to define light. Now, this is an interesting concept. This idea of convergent evolution. We'll go into more detail later, but there are structures. For instance, if you look at birds, you look at the anatomy of birds, and most of them, they all have wings. Most of them have functional wings. They all have wings. More importantly, you can tell by their structure and the genes that lead to their development. So they have bones, the similar bones. They have similar muscles, etc., that define what a wing is. But you know what? Bats have wings too. Now, birds having wings makes sense. Some ancestor birds had wings, and birds have wings, and that makes sense because you have brown eyes. Your parents have brown eyes. There are characteristics that you inherited from your parent and your grandparent. You can go back and look at pictures of your grandparents and see similarities between you and them. We inherit things from our ancestors. I think we all agree on that. So when you look at something like wings, it makes sense that birds have wings that function very similar. Their structures are very similar. Their genes are very similar. But other structures, even though bat and bird wings are very similar, let's take a look at bat wings and a whale fin and a cat leg and a human leg. You'll notice that there's similarities in the bones. You'll notice they're color-coded. This orange bone is in the same place, is serving the same function. This is a little squattier, this a little straighter, maybe this is a little more curved. These are fingers, and they have the same number of joints. And here are the same joints, same number of fingers, but they're positioned differently and angled differently. Obviously, I hope it's obvious that it's because they function differently. And here again, you have the same number of joints and etc., but they have the joints are long. The little metatarsals are larger, longer. Here in the bat wing, they're longer, and they're even longer, and they're kind of stretched out, and they have this skin flap in between them. Where in the whale, the skin surrounds the whole thing, since this is a flipper and this is a wing. Now you look at a bat wing and a bird wing, they have very similar bones. They have an ulna, they have a radius, they have a humerus. You can tell that the shape of the bone and their position is the same. This in a bat wing, the ulna is a little smaller. The radius in a bird wing is a little longer, but they're very similar. Butterflies don't have any bones at all. They still have wings, but they don't have any bones at all. So bats and birds even though they all three of these developed wings over time, they have different lineages. I don't think anyone would argue that butterflies and bats and birds all had a common, all derived wings from the same ancestor. And we'd have to discuss evolution and cladistics a little later to try to really understand the theory or the explanation that evolution provides for how all three of these can get wings and have the same function, all be able to fly, yet only two of them have such similar structure. But there was a common ancestor between these two, none of them, none of that common ancestor did not have wings. Yet this one went off to become a mammal, and then developed wings. This one went off to become a bird, and developed wings. This one developed from an ancestor further back that had that later on developed wings but had no bones. So this one did not have any bones at all. Insects don't have bones. So, that being said, when they say convergent evolution, so we look at wings and bat wings, bird wings, and butterfly wings. They all converged, all these populations converged to come up with this idea of wings. From different ancestors. So that idea is known as convergent evolution. It's not anything you have to understand today, but is an idea that you will have to understand and be able to explain later. So pterodactyls, bats, birds all had wings. Butterflies, actually, I think is a good one to add to that list. And they all evolved wings separately. You saw in the in their lineage, you saw ancestors that didn't have wings in all three of these, and then eventually there was an individual that had wings. The same with sharks and dolphins, and whales and dolphins are very interesting organisms, really excellent examples of the application of the theory of evolution. Sharks and dolphins all have streamlined bodies that allow them to swim very quickly underwater. But of course, dolphins are mammals and sharks are fish. So even they have two different lineages. They're two different sets of ancestors. Dolphins have lungs, or sharks have gills. So when you look at evolution, sometimes you end up with the same structure by different evolutionary paths. And we call that convergent evolution, where these different evolutionary paths converge into one structure, in this case, wings. And they brought this up in this discussion because they're talking about the idea that you're not going to be able to have organisms that look similar to organisms here on Earth off planet. But this person, Mary or Dave, argues, well, there are examples of organisms evolving similar structures from different ancestors. So there's nothing to say that you can't have someone off planet who looks like a human but is of different ancestrage. So what you're getting is, as you read along here, you start to get kind of three different views. You have you have someone like Dave that wants to define life in terms of energy, like the physicists that we looked at, because Dave is a physicist. In other words, he looks at energy and matter and the laws of physics, and he defines everything within those contexts. So Dave has his way of looking at the world. John is a chemist, and he'd like to define life in terms of chemistry, in terms of the interaction between atoms and molecules. And Mary wants to look at both of these and say, wait a minute, let's take a look at is there something deeper or more common between them?